Why do some people believe that China's geographical location is extremely advantageous? Its advantages far surpass those of the United States. The impact of geographical location on a country is undoubtedly significant. Many people believe that the United States has the most advantageous geographical location. This is why it has become the world's dominant power. However, the land chosen by our ancestors actually has geographical conditions far superior to those of the United States. It's just that many people are misled by America's current strength and fail to realize this fact. What are the geographical shortcomings of the United States? And where does China's geographical advantage lie? China and the United States have many geographical similarities. For example, China's land area is 9.6 million square kilometers, while the United States covers 9.37 million square kilometers. Both rank third and fourth in the world in terms of land area. China's terrain is higher in the west and lower in the southeast, with the northeast slightly elevated. The United States has the towering Rocky Mountains in the west, the relatively low Appalachian Mountains in the northeast, and vast plains in the central and southeastern regions. In terms of agricultural conditions, the United States is superior to China. The US has 1.669 million square kilometers of arable land, while China has 1.433 million square kilometers. China's arable land is slightly less, and the yield of many crops is also lower than in the US. Moreover, the US is located in North America with very few land neighbors, reducing the risk of attacks. At first glance, its geographical location seems perfect. But is that really the case? The United States has a very diverse range of terrains. Individually, they all seem fine. It has all the necessary features, but when combined, they appear quite awkward. In China, plateaus and mountains mostly form a protective ring around the plains. Looking counterclockwise from the northeast, the outer ring includes the Changbai Mountains, Greater Khingan Mountains, Mongolian Plateau, Altai Mountains, Qinghai Tibet Plateau, and the Himalayas. The inner ring includes the Kilian Mountains, Loess Plateau, Hengduan Mountains, and Yunnan Guizhou Plateau. The two layers serve as a natural barrier, providing strong protection for the plains and hilly areas in the interior. On the other hand, although the US has many mountain ranges in the west, such as the coastal mountains with an average altitude of about 1,000 meters, the Sierra Nevada mountains at about 2,000 meters, and the Rocky Mountains reaching around 4,000 meters. All these mountain ranges are located in the western region. It's equivalent to wearing only a breastplate. A small portion is located in the east. This results in the central plains being open from north to south. From a climatic perspective, cold air currents from the Arctic can easily penetrate. This makes it prone to cold waves and hurricane weather. Canada from a military perspective from the Great Lakes of North America, directly threatening Chicago, Michigan, and even New York. Mexico can also cross the Rio Grande and head straight into Texas, rushing into the plains of the United States. For both Canada and Mexico, invading the US only requires crossing the border. Once past the border, there is no need to climb mountains nor face natural barriers. Not to mention that the US has an isolated, sparsely populated Alaska. Many are deceived by America's current power, thinking this is no big deal because right now, Canada and Mexico are weak in military and economic strength. Canada's GDP is $2 trillion with 60,000 troops. Mexico's GDP is $1.3 trillion with 190,000 troops. Compared to the US's $25 trillion GDP and 1.4 million They're hardly a match. But the US has only been a nation for 240 years. Looking at a longer historical scale, decline is inevitable when the tides turn, and Mexico or Canada reclaim US territory. America may not be as composed as it is now. Overall, China's landforms are best suited for defensive counterattacks. When weak, China can rely on its two rings of plateaus and mountains for defense. As long as the plains remain stable, China can hold its ground. With prolonged defense, strength recovers. Then China can strike back and reclaim lost land. As long as the enemy can't break through China's plateau terrain, they cannot defeat China. Even if the enemy penetrates China's interior, China still has smaller terrain features for strongholds, allowing it to regroup, await changes in the situation, such as the Guangdong region, the Sichuan Basin, the mountains south of the Yangtze, and the southwestern mountainous areas. Once the situation reverses, troops can emerge from these small defensive positions to reclaim the wetlands. However, the United States does not have such a geographical advantage. Once the US weakens, it will find itself in a position with no natural defenses. At that point, the western coastal plain of Alaska and the southeastern plains of the central US will essentially fight on their own, meaning that once the US declines, it will collapse entirely, with no room for recovery. Moreover, stepping out of the usual mindset that the US Navy is overwhelmingly strong, it is not difficult to see that China's coastal security is actually much stronger than China's that of the southeastern coast is also protected by an inner and outer defensive circle consists of the Korean Peninsula, the Ryukyu Islands, and the Nansha Islands. In times of strength, It can even extend to include Japan's four main islands and the Philippine archipelago. The inner circle includes the Liaodong and Shandong peninsulas, the Jushan archipelago, as well as Taiwan, Hainan, and other offshore islands. With these two defensive circles, China can project power across the Pacific, while also relying on layered coastal defenses in times of retreat, offering great strategic flexibility. Of course, this geography is not without its drawbacks. When weak, China is susceptible to blockades. However, the advantage lies in having an inner circle for allowing China to bide its time and strengthen itself. Furthermore, China's maritime territory is contiguous, reducing the number of naval fleets required and making coordination much easier. Do not underestimate the advantage of a contiguous maritime territory. Both Russia and the United States have suffered greatly from Russia has access to the Baltic Sea in the west, the Pacific Ocean in the east, the Black Sea in the south, and the White Sea in the north. To protect these separate, non-contiguous maritime areas has had to split its naval forces, stationing them in the White Sea, the Northern Fleet operating in the Atlantic, the Pacific Fleet stationed in Vladivostok, the Black Sea Fleet guarding the Black Sea and the Turkish Straits, and the Baltic Fleet based in the Baltic Sea for large fleets in total. These fleets are separated by multiple straits, making coordination extremely difficult. During the Russo-Japanese War, Russia had to pull ships from both the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea to form the Second Pacific Fleet. However, it took over 6 months just to sail from the Atlantic to the Pacific, highlighting the difficulty of coordinating a fragmented The United States is not much better off either. The coastal waters on both sides of the US mainland lack many islands and straits that can be used for defense. Moreover, similar to Russia, it is difficult for the US Navy to communicate between the east and west coasts, as well as the coastal areas of Alaska on the west coast to reach the east coast. They must either go north across the Bering Strait, taking a detour of over 10,000 kilometers through the dangerous south across the Central American Isthmus through the narrow Panama Canal. If the Panama Canal were to be cut off, they would have to take an even longer detour of tens of thousands of kilometers around Cape Horn in South America, making communication extremely inconvenient. Although the US has built a large number of naval bases worldwide to serve as an external defense perimeter, barely solving this problem. This situation cannot last forever. Once US power declines, the lack of an oceanic defense zone for the US Navy will magnify the disadvantage of poor fleet communication to an extreme degree, ultimately leading to disastrous consequences for the United States. From an overall perspective, China has a standard defensive terrain. With a fortress-like system, when strong, it can expand and attack in all directions. When weak, it can retreat and defend, focusing on internal development while waiting for external changes. China has relied on this geographical advantage to survive multiple historical crises. In contrast, the United States is open both by sea and land. To protect such a terrain, the US must remain strong in both its navy and army, and maintain that strength indefinitely, because once it weakens, it can be easily breached. China's advantageous terrain and geographical position allow it to confidently engage in economic, political, and cultural exchanges with the world, promote the Belt and Road Initiative, and advance the development of a shared future for humanity without being overly concerned about its own security. This is something that is difficult for other countries to achieve. China's geographical conditions are highly favorable. There are still a few shortcomings. If these were addressed, it would be perfect. As one of the few ancient civilizations with a 5,000-year history, China's history has continued uninterrupted to this day. This must be due to certain geographical advantages. In fact, China has vast territory, diverse landscapes, and both land and sea access. But in terms of geographical conditions, only India in South Asia and the United States in North America can compare with China. However, nothing can be absolutely perfect. China still has some geographical shortcomings. Most of these are not fatal, but they have invisibly restricted China's further development. So, what are these shortcomings? And what challenges do they bring us? Food is the most fundamental need. To have food, farming is essential. Therefore, having many mountains and few plains has become China's biggest and most obvious geographical shortcoming. According to the National Geographic Census report released in 2017, mountainous areas account for 43.65% of China's total land area, while plains make up only 26.62%. In other words, China has only about 2.7 million square kilometers of plains. Moreover, some of these are desert plains, saline alkali plains, and other land unsuitable for farming. After excluding these unsuitable lands and adding in terraced farmland, China's actual arable land area is only about 1.43 million square kilometers, accounting for roughly 16% of the national land area. This is lower than the United States' 18% and far below India's 51.6%. India has an extremely high arable land ratio. Although India's total land area is only 2.98 million square kilometers, its arable land area is comparable to China's. This is one of the key reasons why India's population has surpassed China's. Furthermore, China's plains are not ideally distributed from a climatic perspective. If the goal was purely high agricultural output, the southern region would be the best place for farming. Unfortunately, looking at the map, southern China is mostly mountains and hills. There are only a few major plains, such as the Yangtze River middle and lower plains 160,000 square kilometers, the Chengdu Plain 18,000 square kilometers, and the Pearl River Delta Plain 11,000 square kilometers. Other regions, such as Zhejiang, are known for their 7 parts mountains, 2 parts water, and 1 part farmland ratio, with per capita arable land being less than 0.4. Similarly, in Fujian, the North China Plain alone covers an area of 310,000 square kilometers, not to mention the fertile soil. The Northeast Plain spans an area of up to 350,000 square kilometers. If our country could have a north-south spanning Central Great Plain with a total area of 1.53 million square kilometers, like the United States, then the North would have much more industrial land, and the South could compensate for its shortage of arable land. This would undoubtedly bring significant benefits to the overall economic development of our country. In fact, Southern Asia is not without plains. The Red River Plain of the Indo-Chinese Peninsula, the Mekong River Plain, the Menom River Plain, the Lower Irrawaddy River Plain, and the Ganges Plain of the Indian Peninsula are all excellent Great Plains. Unfortunately, none of these belong to our territory. Moreover, these peninsulas encircle our southwest, creating another major challenge for our country: the lack of an outlet to the Indian Ocean. Our country is undeniably a major maritime nation, with a total coastline length exceeding 18,000 kilometers. It has major ports like Dalian Port, Qingdao Port, Shanghai Port, Shenzhen Port, and many other large ports lined up from north to south. However, all these ports are on the Pacific side, which means our country has always faced the risk of being strategically locked by the island chains, from the Kuril Islands, the 4 main islands of Japan, the Ryukyu Islands, to the southern Taiwan Island, the Philippine Archipelago, and the Sunda Islands. Among all these islands, only Taiwan is our territory. The risks are undeniably high. If we could secure an outlet to the Indian Ocean, it would significantly alleviate strategic pressure from the Pacific. Moreover, even in times of relying solely on Pacific ports for transoceanic trade would result in extremely high costs. For instance, when importing oil from the Middle East, tankers must exit the Persian Gulf, pass through the narrow Strait of Malacca, and then be transported from the South China Sea to various coastal ports. This process is not only time-consuming and costly, but also carries certain risks, especially in the Strait of Malacca, where the narrowest part is less than 3 kilometers wide. If it were to be blockaded, our country's transoceanic trade would be brought to a near standstill. Therefore, securing an outlet to the Indian Ocean would be of great strategic significance. Not only can it significantly shorten the voyage, but it can also bypass the Malacca Strait, enhancing our country's ability to manage maritime trade risks. The lack of an outlet to the Indian Ocean is our country's second weakness. The third weakness is related to the river system. Although our country has many major rivers, most of these rivers flow in an east-west direction. There is a lack of large north-south rivers connecting different water systems. Apart from the historically famous Yellow River capturing the Hoi River and flowing into the sea, cases of major river systems merging are extremely rare. This often leads to situations where some areas suffer from extreme drought, while others experience severe flooding. In contrast, the United States, with just the Mississippi River, is able to irrigate almost the entire Central Plains. This is nearly perfect. In China, the Yangtze River Basin has a total surface water resource of 848.5 billion cubic meters, the Pearl River Basin 540.4 billion, while the Yellow River Basin has only 57.7 billion, and the Hoi River Basin merely 61.4 billion. Thus, water shortages in northern China are extremely severe. The provinces in the Yellow, Hoi, and high river basins must rely on just 7% of the nation's water resources to support 35% of the country's arable land and 32% of its GDP. If a large river flowing from south to north could divert some of the water from the Yangtze and Pearl rivers to the north, it would undoubtedly be a major benefit. At this point, many people might think of China's south to north water diversion project. This project takes water from the Yangtze River to replenish the Yellow, Hoi, and high regions, aiming to solve this critical problem. Therefore, in the long run, this weakness can likely be addressed through human intervention. However, addressing the weakness in lake resources is even more complex. Lakes serve two main purposes: storing fresh water and regulating water flow. Despite being one of the world's 5 largest land countries, China does not have a single lake ranked among the world's top 30 in freshwater storage capacity. This is quite embarrassing. After all, the United States Lake Superior ranks 4th in the world in water storage, while Russia's Lake Baikal ranks second only to the Caspian Sea, making it the world's largest freshwater lake. Historically, this lake was even part of China's territory for a significant period. Currently, China's largest freshwater lake, Poyang Lake, has a maximum storage capacity of only 26 billion cubic meters, just 1/1000th of Lake Baikal's capacity. Additionally, China lacks sufficient lakes for water regulation. This is particularly problematic in northern China, where heavy rainfall and sudden precipitation increases often lead to widespread flooding. These water resources often flow away in vain due to the lack of lakes for storage. It is truly a pity. Of course, although China has quite a few shortcomings, when looking at the world as a whole, there are very few countries with perfect topography. For example, the European part of Russia is vast and flat, which seems far superior to China. However, in reality, it is exposed on all sides, with no natural barriers for defense. Similarly, the United States Great Plains are only flanked by mountains on the east leaving the north and south exposed. In summer, hot and humid monsoons sweep in unimpeded from the south. Storms and cold waves surge down from the north, often causing severe natural disasters. Therefore, there is no need for us to underestimate ourselves. This land was safeguarded by our ancestors and forebears, who shed their blood and sacrificed their lives for us. Regardless of how many shortcomings there may be, we should cherish it dearly. Essential geography knowledge that every Chinese person must know is here. Be sure to watch until the end. China's full name is the People's Republic of China. It is located in the eastern part of the Eurasian continent, on the western shore of the Pacific Ocean. It is one of the 4 great ancient civilizations of the world. China has a land area of approximately 9.6 million square kilometers, making it the 3rd largest country in the world. China has 14 land neighbors and 8 maritime neighbors. Its land border stretches over 22,000 kilometers, while its coastline extends over 18,000 kilometers. China's offshore seas, from north to south, include the Bahai Sea, the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea, and the South China Sea. The total maritime area is approximately 4.7 million square kilometers. China's northernmost point is Mohe City in Heilongjiang Province, while the southernmost point is Zhengmu Ansha in the Nansha Islands. The north-south span is over 5,000 kilometers, covering much of the northern hemisphere, stretching from the tropics to the cold temperate zone, with temperature differences reaching up to 80 degrees Celsius. China's easternmost point is Haixiozi Island in Fuyuan City, Heilongjiang Province, while the westernmost point is the Pamir Plateau in Akto County, Xinjiang. The east-west span is over 5,200 kilometers. Haixiozi Island is the first place in China to see the sunrise, while the Pamir Plateau is the last place in China to witness the sunset. The time difference between the two is 5 time zones. When residents of Heilongjiang are going to sleep, nightlife in Xinjiang is just beginning. China's terrain is higher in the west and lower in the east, divided into 3 major steppes. The first step is the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, known as the roof of the world. It has an average altitude of over 4,000 meters. The second step has an altitude mainly between 1,000 and 2,000 meters, consisting mainly of plateaus and basins. The third step has an altitude mostly below 500 meters, dominated by hills and plains. China's 4 major plateaus are the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, the Inner Mongolia Plateau, the Loess Plateau, and the Yunnan Guizhou Plateau. China's 4 major basins are the Tarim Basin, the Zhongga Basin, the Khitan Basin, and the Sichuan Basin. China's 3 major plains are the Northeast Plain, the North China Plain, and the Middle Lower Yangtze Plain. The Yangtze River is the longest river in China, the 3rd longest river in the world, and the mother river of its total length is approximately 6,363 kilometers. It originates from the Tanggula Mountains Geladandong Snow Peak on the Qinghai Tibet Plateau and flows into the East China Sea. The Yellow River is China's 2nd longest river. It is the main birthplace of Chinese civilization, originating from the northern part of the Bayanha Mountains on the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, such as the Bahai Sea, with a total length of 5,464 kilometers. Looking at the map, the main course of the Yellow River resembles a massive basin. Qinghai Lake is the largest lake in China, located in the northeastern part of Qinghai Province. It has an elevation of 3,196 meters, covering an area of 4,635 square kilometers. China also has Poyang Lake, besides Qinghai Lake, Dongting Lake, Tai Lake, Hongs Lake, and Kaohu Lake, 5 major freshwater lakes. The Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region is the largest provincial-level administrative region in China by land area, covering 1.649 million square kilometers, which accounts for about 1/6 of China's total land area. The largest island in China is Taiwan Island, with an area of 35,800 square kilometers. The second largest island is Hainan Island, covering an area of 33,900 square kilometers. China's 3 major straits are the Chengzhou Strait between Hainan Island and Lijiao Peninsula, the Taiwan Strait between Taiwan Island and Fujian Province, and the Bahai Strait between the Shandong Peninsula and the Liaodong Peninsula. China's climate is divided into 5 temperature zones, spanning from north to south across the frigid zone, the temperate zone, the warm temperate zone, the subtropical and tropical zones, as well as the plateau climate zone. China is divided into 4 geographical regions. The world's highest peak, Mount Everest, is the main peak of the Himalayas, with an elevation of 8,848.86 meters. To this day, it continues to rise at a rate of 1.8 centimeters per year. China's 3 famous mountains and 5 great mountains refer to the 3 well-known tourist mountains. The 5 great mountains are Mount Tai, Mount Hua, Mount Heng in Hunan Song, and Mount Heng in the Great Wall from Jiuyuan in the west extends to Hushan by the Yola River in the total length of the Great Wall is about 21,196 kilometers. This defensive barrier against invasions by nomadic tribes in ancient times allowed Chinese civilization to be continuously passed down through generations.